Hey guys, so in this video we're going to talk about the create task. We're going to talk about two things as it relates to the create task. One, the program code requirements, and then two, we're going to go over an example program. And while we go over this example program, we will talk about how this example program meets the requirements of the program code for the create task. All right, so the next thing we'll discuss are the general requirements for the create task. So there are three general requirements. One, and probably the most important part, is the final program code. So this is the actual code that you will create for your program. The second is a video that displays your program running. And the last one is the written response portion. So they will have a document you need to complete. And it basically needs to you need to identify how your program meets the requirements and show that you actually understand what is happening in your program. All right, so now let's shift our attention to the actual program code and the requirements for the program code. So in your program code, you have four general requirements. You have a requirement for comments, input, using a collection of data, and finally using procedures. All right, so the first requirement we'll be focusing on is the requirement for comments. So generally speaking, comments are good coding practice because they help improve program readability. And what that means is that they make your program a little bit easier to understand. And for the create task, that's really important because your program will be graded by people who have never met you and people who will not talk to you. So if the PDF isn't clear or your video isn't clear, you need comments to help them understand exactly what's happening in your program at every level. So if there's anything that you think could potentially be unclear, please feel free to use a comment to explain it. The document that I'm sharing on screen will be shared with you, so you'll have access to all these links to learn how to use comments. All right, so the next requirement is for input. So your program has to have some form of input. Now, the one that we've seen in class currently is from the input function, but Python also allows you to have input from files. So don't think that you are limited to only using the input function. If you want to create a program that uses files, you can feel free. You will have access to resources to help you with that, but your program in general must have some form of input. All right, so the third part is about collection of data. Now, we've used variables to store single pieces of data, but a collection of data is something similar to a variable because it holds data, except that it holds multiple pieces of data at once. So the thing that we've seen that is most like this is a list, because a list can hold multiple pieces of data at once. So for this section, you'll have the option of using either a list or a dictionary, and both will have videos provided for them, so you can use those as guides on how to use either in your program. All right, and the final of the create task is the procedure. Now, a procedure is really just a function in Python, and we also have videos for procedures and for all the content that is required inside your procedure. So there are 6 main requirements for your procedure section. So you must define a procedure in your program that has one or more parameters. So you can't have a procedure that does not take any kind of data into itself. The procedure must also produce some kind of output based on those parameters. So it has to put something out based on those parameters. So that output doesn't have to be a return statement. It just has to do something with that data. A procedure should be used at least twice in your code, and that will actually be a requirement in section 3D of the written response. And the next thing too is that your procedure must include 3 things. 1, selection, which is conditional statements, so if, elif, and else. 2, iteration, any kind of loop, so a for loop, a while loop. And 3, sequencing, which for sequencing, if you already have a selection and iteration, you automatically have sequencing. And the last thing is that the procedure does not have to have a return statement, as I mentioned before, but it does have to produce some kind of output based on the parameters.